Hello, class. Today we're going to talk about the Modern Language Association guidelines for writing college papers. The purpose of this video is to show you what you need to do to make your documents appear consistently clean and professional for an academic audience. There are lots of rules, lots of terminology and tips for this, more than you might expect, so you will want to listen carefully and take notes. Most jobs that require a college degree will involve some form of document production. Briefs, reports, charts, proposals, correspondence with colleagues and clients, and so on. Nurses, teachers, engineers, lawyers, business managers, web designers, all these careers require some form of writing, which is why this is so important. Eventually, you will learn that there are professional expectations and rules for how these documents should be formatted, organized, and presented, depending on the audience and purpose of your writing. The first document you will prepare for any skilled position will likely be your application letter. Whether or not your application leads to an interview and whether you become a trusted and respected member of your professional community will depend in part on how you represent yourself in the documents you create. So in this class, you will learn the standard rules or format for preparing a college paper. This format may be applied to just about any document in most college classes. Originally conceived by the Modern Language Association of America, or MLA, this is an international organization founded in 1883. It's been around a long time. These format guidelines are routinely scrutinized, debated, and occasionally updated to reflect current changes in how college students do their work. Learning MLA guidelines and holding yourself to account for how your documents appear will not only affect your success as a college student, but also instill habits necessary for a successful career later. So I'm going to cover a lot of things in this video, but I'm going to try to break it down into 8 categories. We're going to talk about font, talk about margins, headings, titles, the title of your work, line spacing, which can be tricky, paragraphing, page numbering also can be challenging for students, and the works cited page. So these 8 things, we'll cover all 8 of these in this video, starting with the font. So what is the font? For our purposes, we will use the term font to refer to the appearance of characters. And notice that I'm putting some terms in boldface and a slightly different color because I want you to be familiar with this vocabulary. So by characters, I mean letters, obviously numbers and symbols, and mechanically or digitally produced text. Microsoft Word offers users several hundred fonts, many of which can be grouped into 2 basic categories, serif fonts and sans serif fonts. The term serif refers to a small line that extends from the end of a larger stroke in a character. Sans serif fonts do not have this feature. So what I'm showing you here are 3 very common serif fonts, Garamond, Georgia, and Times New Roman. You can look at Times New Roman there, and you'll see that at the end of the stroke that makes the S, you see a little extra mark there. Almost all the characters have these. You look at the base of the R, and then the 3 downstrokes of the M. You see those little extra marks coming off the ends of the strokes. Those are called serifs. Another feature of serif fonts is that the lines that make up the characters can be different thicknesses. Like notice the downstroke of the N compared to the slanting downstroke there, which is much thicker. This is very typical of a serif font. Most sans serif fonts the lines are more or less uniformly thick. That's not true of all sans serif fonts. Like Optima, for example, is a sans serif font that has variable line density. But here are some typical sans serif fonts. And what you'll notice about these is they do not have those little extra marks at the end of the strokes in the letter. So unless you're instructed to do otherwise, you should always use a serif font. Times New Roman is considered standard for academic writing. However, most word processing software defaults to sans serif on startup. This is in part because these fonts, sans serif fonts, are more workable in digital media like your email, your text messages. These are all usually in sans serif fonts unless you change them. It's therefore likely that you will have to change the font to Times New Roman every time you create a new document. It is easy for a trained eye to recognize the difference. And to demonstrate that for you, I'll show you a sample of text here. You can read that and see if you can detect where the font changes from Times New Roman to a sans serif font and then changes back to Times New Roman again. And there is the change. That is a sans serif font. Usually this happens because writers copy and paste material into their documents without changing the font, which is a glaring mistake. Finally, a font's point size determines the size of the characters in your text. And I give you 4 different point sizes for Times New Roman over there on the right. The higher the number, obviously the larger the characters. A 12-point font is considered standard for college papers. You certainly wouldn't want to submit something in 16-point Times New Roman. With few exceptions, both font and point size, that is 12-point Times New Roman, should remain consistent throughout your documents. This includes the headings, the titles, and the page numbers. Now I'm showing you a screenshot of a sample paper on the right, written by a student named Hannibal Lecter for my class, and you'll notice that the title of the essay, Lystragonian Crockery and Trivets, is too large. It is not in the proper 12-point Times New Roman. It's also a sans serif font on top of it, so there's a double fault there. Okay, so we'll talk about margins now, the margins of your documents. The margin is the space that appears around the edges of the printed page. MLA format stipulates a 1-inch margin for all 4 sides. That's top, bottom, as well as left and right. And in the screenshot on the right, I grayed out the text, and you can see in white up to the edge of the paper, there is a 1-inch margin on the left, and again, a 1-inch margin at the top. You should note that some versions of Microsoft Word preset margins to 1¼ inches, so you should always double check and adjust your margins if necessary. It will be very obvious to any experienced reader if your margins are incorrect. Talk about the heading now. Say, what is the heading? The heading contains information that identifies you, the student, and the course associated with your document. The heading should always appear in the upper left-hand corner of the first page, and only the first page, and should contain the following information in the following order. Your name first, followed by the instructor's name, course identification, and the due date for the assignment. The due date for the assignment. So I have a little bit more to say about some of these. So there's Hannibal Lecter's name, and then the instructor's name. Use formal prefixes, Mr., Ms., or Doctor if your instructor has a PhD, is a professor. Make sure that you use formal prefixes with your instructor's names. These are professional documents. Avoid using titles like professor. Often students use those titles mistakenly, and it can be confusing. But above all, make sure your spelling is accurate. Spell your instructor's name correctly. Next is the course identification line. Mr. Lecter is in an English 1102 class. Do not identify the course by name. So, for example, in this class, I wouldn't want a student to say English or composition or English composition 2 or anything like that. Use the 4-letter course prefix in your schedule. For English classes at Gordon State, it's ENGL, all capital letters for English classes, and then the course number, which is 1102, and the section identifier, which is always a letter. That letter will identify which section of English 1102 you are taking. There might be 50 or 60 English 1102 classes, and all of them will have letters, different letters depending on who's teaching the course and where the course meets and what time. So make sure that you include all 3 of those components in your course identification. And finally, the due date. Again, use the date that the assignment is due. And spell out the month followed by the day and year. Spell out the month followed by the day and year. Do not use numeric date lines like 9/17/2025 or hyphenated numeric date lines. Just make sure that you're spelling out the month. We'll move on now to talk about the title. What do you title your documents? Formal essays should always have a title that reflects the content or purpose of the essay. Avoid using bland, generic titles like Essay 1. The title should be informative, and it should set expectations for the reader. For shorter assignments, however, like homework assignments, in my classes, you can use the title of the assignment as listed in the instructions or in the assignment schedule. The title, regardless, the title should appear centered on the page directly below the date line of the heading. So here you can see that in this screenshot, the date line, September 17th, 2025, and then the title, Laestrygonian, Crockery, and Trivets, appears centered right below the date line. You should not underline or italicize your title or enclose it in quotation marks. Remember, it should appear in the same font as the rest of your document, 12-point Times New Roman. The most common mistake students make, however, is failing to comply with title case rules in writing their titles. Title case rules require the capitalization of the first word in a title, and then every other word except for articles like the, a, an, conjunctions like and, but, or, and short prepositions, 5 or fewer letters like of, over, or to. So if you look at the title for this sample document, obviously the first word, Laestrygonian, would be capitalized. That would be capitalized anyway. I capitalize crockery. I do not capitalize and because it's a conjunction, and I capitalize trivets. So that is an example of the application of title case rules to a title. Now for line spacing. Documents should be double-spaced. This includes headings, block quotations, which we'll talk about a little later in another lesson, and works cited entries. line spacing should appear perfectly uniform throughout the document. Default settings on Microsoft Word may insert an extra line space between paragraphs. If you do not change this setting, every time you execute a hard return, that is when you hit the return or enter key to skip to the next line, an extra line space you do not need will appear in the document. So this setting has to be changed if it's doing that, and it can be changed using the paragraph formatting tool. I'll go into more detail about this later in the video. But I'm going to give you a chance to see an example of faulty line spacing. There it is. The line spacing in this document is not good. And on the right, it is correct. So if you need to, pause the video and take a look at these two documents and see if you can spot the differences. There are spatial differences. On the left, we're getting extra line spaces. Again, every time the writer, every time Mr. Lecter hit the enter key or the return key, he got an extra line space. So there's an extra line space here, an extra one after his name, an extra one after the course identification line. It's another extra line space after the date line, and again after the title. And then in the body of the essay, after his first paragraph, he hit the return key and got an extra line space before he started his next paragraph. So a lot of extra line spaces in there, and notice the document on the right does not have those. If I take correct line spacing and overlay it over this incorrect line spacing, you will see very quickly see the difference. The correct line spacing is in orange. The faulty line spacing is in black. Okay, talking about paragraphing now. Paragraphing. The first line of every paragraph, including the first paragraph, should be indented. Indented a ½ inch from the left margin. So I'm going to put a gray box around the text to show our margin in white there on the left. And there's the 1-inch margin, and there's our ½ inch indent. This indent is already a tab preset in Microsoft Word. You don't really have to do anything except hit the tab key one time to get a proper indent. Sometimes students will use the space bar, hit the space bar 2, 3, 4, 5, 25, 30 times. That's always going to give you an incorrect indent. Just hit the tab key once. That will give you the same indent every time. Page numbering. Page numbering is tricky. There's a lot to talk about with page numbering. Page numbers should be placed in the top right corner of the page. Top right corner of the page. 1/2 inch from the top, 1 inch from the right. This is called a header. H-E-A-D-E-R, which is not to be confused with the similar sounding term heading, which we talked about earlier in this video. Microsoft Word provides an insert tool that makes this process easy, and I'll show you a video a little later on about how to do this. If you use this tool, you should not have to make any adjustments to your margins to accommodate your header. However, there are 2 important changes you will still have to make for your page numbering to be compliant with MLA guidelines. So here is a screenshot of a properly formatted student paper that has a proper page number in the top right corner of the document. I'm going to put gray around the text so that you can see the margin in white. You'll notice that Lecter 4 is flush against the right margin, 1 inch, but it is halfway down from the top edge of the page, which makes it a ½ inch down from the top. So 1 inch from the right and a ½ inch down from the top. So when you insert your page numbers, it's just going to put a number in there. So you're going to have to double click on the page number to open the header and add your surname or your last name, followed by a space, and then the page number. Sometimes students forget the space, but you got to put a space in there. Your last name followed by a space, and then the page number. And then Microsoft Word will automatically insert your name in this position throughout the entire document. You don't have to do it on every single page. You do it once, and it will be applied to all of your headers, page 1 through 100 if necessary. The other change you'll have to make is you'll have to change the font to 12-point Times New Roman. When Word puts the page number in there, even if the body of your document, the text body, is already in Times New Roman, Microsoft Word will not put the page number in Times New Roman. You're going to have to do that manually. So again, I'll show you how to do that a little later in this video. But you'll need to make sure that you correct the font. But once you do it in one header, it will do it to all of your headers. It will change it through the rest of the document. So we'll come back to a couple of videos later to talk about that in more detail. Although no longer a strict rule, many instructors, and I am one of them, still prefer page numbering to begin on page 2 of the document, not on page 1. Therefore, no page number should appear on the first page of any document that you submit in this class in MLA format. When you use the Microsoft Word Insert tool to put in your page numbers, you will be given the option to eliminate the page number from the first page. And I will show you that later. So we'll come back to page numbers in a moment, but finally we're going to turn to the Works Cited page. So the Works Cited page, which is a list of sources that you use, it should be placed at the end of your document. So anything that you summarized or paraphrased or quoted in your paper, any source, will be listed on this page. The contents of the Works Cited page will not satisfy word count or length requirements. So if your professor says, I want you to give me a 5-page paper, the Works Cited page is not going to count as your 5th page. I'm going to put up a sample Works Cited page for Mr. Lecter's paper here. So the words Works Cited are much like the title of your documents. It should be capitalized and centered at the top of the page. Again, your Works Cited page is a separate page. It's a brand new page in your document. So it always begins at the top. Page numbering should be continuous with the rest of the document. Page numbering should not start over. Items should be listed alphabetically. Do not use numbers or bullet points on your Works Cited page. So you can see here, I have 3 entries. The first one is by Feldman, the next one is by Schutt, and the last one is by Christy Turner. 3 sources there. They are listed alphabetically. The tricky thing with Works Cited entries has to do with what's called a hanging indent. So the first line of each new Works Cited item should be flush with the left margin. Now I put the left margin in gray this time, and you'll notice that the first line of each new entry is right up against that margin, so 1 inch. If the item has more than 1 line, all lines after the first one should be indented a 1/2 inch. And this is called a hanging indent. So you see the first item with Feldman has a second line with a hanging indent. Again, usually you have to hit the enter key to go to the next line and then hit tab to get that 1/2 inch indent. And then my third entry also has a hanging indent, but my second entry does not have a hanging indent. It all fit on 1 line. So as we come to the end of this, we're going to talk about problems in formatting. We're going to look at a few videos here just to give you some additional tips on how to solve common problems, with the caveat that The software you're using, the program you're using, the version of the program you're using may be a little different, but these videos should point you in the right direction. We're going to look at three things. We're going to look at paragraph spacing first. This is one of the most common mistakes that students make in their documents, which leads to point deductions. We're going to look at inserting page numbers. And then finally, we're going to look at editing page numbers to make them MLA compliant. So we'll move all this up and we'll pull up our first video on paragraph spacing. There it is. So as you can see, looking at this document, this is the same one I showed you earlier. The student's paragraph spacing is wrong, and it makes their line spacing wrong. They've got a bunch of extra line spaces in there. He has a bunch of extra line spacing in there that he doesn't need. So what he's going to do is he's going to go up to the toolbar at the top of the screen. He's going to highlight the text first, then go up to the toolbar where paragraph formatting is. You might have to look for that, and this is where the line spacing options appear. It's double spaced. And then click on Remove Space After Paragraph. You might have noticed the change. I'm going to undo it. There. I'm going to show you again, going up to the paragraph tool and scrolling down to Remove Space After Paragraph. It might be a box that you need to check, but now the line spacing in the document is correct. Okay, inserting page numbers. Get a video here. You can see this document has no page numbers yet. So what I'm going to do is go up to Insert in the toolbar and move over to Page Number. Click Page Number. And it'll ask me, where do you want it? And I want it at the top of the page as a header, and I want it on the right. And it offers different positions, but obviously you want it on the right. And you click OK, and it puts the page number in there. Click on page number and say show number on first page. It might have a box that says don't show number on first page, or it might say use different first page. And if you click that box, it will hide the page number on the first page of your document. So page 1 will not say page 1. Your page numbering will actually begin on the second page with page 2 at the top. Okay. Now we need to edit those page numbers. There's still work that needs to be done. So I've created a separate video for that. Here we are now. We have the page number up there. It looks like it's gray. That's because it's a header. And when you're working in the body of your essay, your headers will appear gray, not black. So we need to change that header. So I'm going to double click up in the header box, or where the area of the header is. Boom. Now the header turned black, so I can work on it. Now, and the body is gray. I'm going to go back up, double click, turns black. So now I can edit my page number, and I can put Mr. Lecter's name in there. There we go. Put in the space, and then click back into the body, and there you see the page number, but the font is wrong. So I'm going to click back up into the header. I'm going to highlight it. I'm not used to this big cursor. And then go up to the Home tab of my toolbox and change the font to Times New Roman 12 point. Now double click back on the body, and now you can see that my page number is MLA compliant. It is Times New Roman 12 point. It is 1/2 inch from the top and 1 inch from the right. So that concludes this video on MLA guidelines for college papers.